In our gospel reading this morning, on the surface, we can assume that the meaning of the parable of the 10 bridesmaids is easy to understand. On one level, it's a straightforward one. And the major components of the story land themselves readily to be an allegorical one. And it is easy to match up each character and the event itself with a real-life person, even an event. And the bridegroom is Jesus, the 10 bridesmaids are his followers who all belonged to the same community, the same group of friends, and they all fell asleep waiting. The oil for the lamps is faith, and the arrival of the bridegroom lends itself to the second coming of Christ at the end of history. But it's not that simple. My New Testament lecturer, you probably know well, Robin Whittaker, used to remind us when we did our New Testament studies. She cautioned us not to turn against turning parables into straight-up allegories. But there are a few odd things in this parable. Firstly, where's the bride? There are bridesmaids and there is a groom, but we've got to wonder if the bride got cold feet and took off on the back of a horse. Not one word is devoted to that person who tends to be the central figure at any wedding. And if there is one, who would she represent if this whole story really is just an allegory? And if that's not enough, what's up with the bridesmaid coming to a conclusion that waiting would be longer than expected and that they would need extra oil for their lamps? I mean, imagine attending a wedding or even seeing a wedding right here in our church, and you see the bridesmaids walking down the aisle, and half of the bridesmaids are lugging jerry cans of oil up towards the altar. Then, if that is not enough, what is the story behind not sharing their oil to others? I mean, that hardly seems to be the kind of Jesus follower kind of treating other people, would it? And it makes you wonder, can it really be the same Jesus telling the story, or this story, who earlier said, if someone wants to take your coat, give your cloak too, or give to everyone who begs from you? Wouldn't a generous person say, come, let's share this oil and divide it amongst ourselves so we can wait together? Well, it didn't happen here. Half of those bridesmaids hoarded the extra supply and sending the other half to find an open 7-Eleven so that they can buy the oil. Nonetheless, to get to the core issue of this parable, we need to back up a bit and consider the context. The immediate context begins in the earlier chapter 24 of Jesus' long speech about the end of the world. All of that chapter is consumed by the apocalyptic rhetoric or language about the signs at the end of age. And throughout it, Jesus makes it clear, including himself, that he does not know when will his second coming be. He was not creating starry-eyed disciples just scanning the horizon for clues to history's end. According to Matthew's presentation of Jesus, Jesus was attempting to create focused disciples to keep their eyes on the chief things of the gospel, clearly outlined in the earlier chapters of Matthew chapter 5. It's generally known as the Beatitudes. You probably have heard that. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Blessed is those who mourn, they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, blessed are the peacemakers, and so forth. Jesus, in other words, was not training short distance sprinters who will dash for history's final end, but long distance marathon runners in the faith who are poised to stay faithful over the long haul. Each week, when I spend time here, 2 days in the office, I always take the time to walk around the campus, and especially come and spend time here in this worship sanctuary. I'm always overwhelmed by the details of this building. From its layout, the timber vaulted ceiling above us, the arched arcades, the profile columns, even the windows around the church, even the organ. And as I was reflecting on this parable, I couldn't help but think of those who labored to make this building arrive to what it is now from 1875. How were they feeling about all of this? What was their faith journey like? Were there days when they had no oil and other days like those who had the oil supply? Was their love for Jesus and the kingdom of God like those of marathon runners? Were they didn't give up? Not giving up on Jesus' love and acceptance, and they expressed that by their gratitude. They expressed their gratitude by building this beautiful building. I think so. I'm convinced as I look through that they were focused on God, expressing their love of God in their devotion, an unwavering determination to finish the work while waiting. And onwards, from then on, there are those like yourselves here, the choir, the organist, who continue to keep the flame of faith going, all coming together, continuing the ministries of connecting with people, staying and being faithful to God through your worship, your prayers, your visitations, and your support to the wider community. Our saints of old and you can be compared to those who had the extra oil. You were focused as you waited. Now, I don't know anyone who likes waiting, much less hurrying to wait. Waiting to check in for your flights, waiting on the freeways, waiting in the car on Toorak Road on a busy afternoon. Every time I drive out there from the office, I say, Lord, have mercy on my soul. Waiting for the tram, waiting for a new day and a new opportunity. And there are those who are like me, waiting for my hair to grow back. The church is a waiting community. It is a waiting community because it is a confessing community. This is what we sing or we say when we have communion. Christ is risen, Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. A waiting church is always waiting for God, always waiting for the Spirit to move. Our crisis becomes the crisis of God's action. And as we wait for God's action, we open ourselves to God by ministering to one another in love. We concern ourselves with the present, which is the only place where we will live out our connections. It's in the right now. And in this context, we then see the reason to plan ahead of the likely need for extra oil. It becomes clear. Wise, because we are wise believers, and wise believers live for Christ in every moment, doing the work that each day presents, and doing it precisely because they know the bridegroom is always at hand, whether the end happens anytime sooner or not. Wise believers living, waiting, even sleeping with enough oil in their lamps, it does suggest that it is in the spirit of the Beatitudes that we heard earlier that characterizes those who will wait and will recognize the bridegroom, the Lord, when he comes. The saints of old and yours, your faithfulness, and couldn't help but think of those that built this building, was centered on the cross of Christ the Redeemer, who calls and offers himself out of pure grace. Out of that grace redeems us from all evil and sin. And we need to also understand, too, that like the saints of old, that the second coming of Christ is not about a far-off event, but it is Christ's continual presence with us through all our waiting. I'll say that again. It's Christ's continual presence with us through all our waiting. Someone asked Martin Luther, the German theologian and religious reformer, what would you do if you knew Jesus was coming again tomorrow? Martin Luther replied, I'd think I'd go out and plant an apple tree. Exactly. To God be the glory.